Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, January 25th, 2018. Hi again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani back inside our New York City studio. Great show planned for all of you. Let's get right into it. That is the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post. That is Danny Segura of MMAfighting.com. And of course, at the end, that is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall of MMAfighting.com and The Ringer. Okay, guys, much to discuss this week. A lot going on, tons going on. 2 events last weekend, a lot of news since then. Let us start with the baddest man on the planet. Let's start with Stipe Miocic. Let's start with what he did on Saturday. He, of course, broke the record, most successful title defenses in the UFC heavyweight division. And it's an interesting thing because you were there live, I was there live, and I enjoyed the fight, but I was very surprised afterwards at how split people were about this fight. Like, let's put aside the feat. Let's put aside the record, just the actual heavyweight title fight and what transpired. Was this a good heavyweight title fight, or was this a lackluster heavyweight title fight? Because I've seen both sides of the spectrum.
Well, it was a great heavyweight title fight for Stipe Miocic. I mean, you can criticize his challenger if you want, but you call him the baddest man on the planet. I'll call him the smartest man on the planet. I mean, he fought as perfect a fight as you can fight as a heavyweight. And a lot of times we talk about these guys. Ngannou had knocked out his last 4 opponents in the first, or had finished his last 4 opponents in the first round. Stipe had knocked out all of his last 4 in the first round, so that's all we talked about. That's all we expected with some kind of big, crushing knockout. But instead, we got a guy who knew exactly what he needed to do to win, and he did it. And
did you enjoy it watching it live?
Yeah. Well, I was sitting there. My heart racing.
Yeah.
For the first half of the first round, I thought Stipe is going to get killed here because it looked like Ngannou was just going to kill him.
Yeah.
I mean, and Stipe was just so elusive, and it was all defense. He had no offense at all in the beginning. It was all defense, and I thought, man, eventually this guy's going to catch up to him, but he didn't because
did the crowd like it?
Yes, I mean, well, Chuck and I were talking as we were coming in today about how oftentimes when you see a fight where, with guys who are banging, and someone goes for a takedown, the immediate reaction of the crowd is to start booing. But they did not, right? It was a whole different kind of crowd.
Yeah, it was. I thought that was actually kind of cool because I thought that people understood that the best way for a game plan for it to beat a guy like Ngannou who's going to try to knock your block off is to take him down. So on those immediate attempts, whenever he was first successful, there was a huge swell from the crowd. That appreciated that, which was kind of cool. I think that going back to what your original question, the unfortunate sort of side effect of a heavyweight fight is the inevitability if it gets past a certain threshold of time, it could turn into a little bit of a sludge fest. Like it starts to slow down. The guys just don't have it. Once it got past the second round, you could see where we were seated for media. You could see Ngannou come over, and you thought, this guy's gassed. He probably has very little left. He's going to try to throw whatever bomb he can muster, but if he gets taken down again, it's going to stay there. That was just the feeling, and that's kind of the way it played out. But I thought from Miocic's standpoint, I'm like, this is a guy. I saw somebody, I think it was R.J. Clifford, had tweeted something like, hey, this is a guy who's been he's put himself into situations where he's competing exhausted his whole life, and this is where it pays off. Like, he trains to be exhausted. And I'm like, that's a good point, because when you look at a guy like that, you just saw that he had bigger reserves. He could dig deeper and longer and further, and he could still muster just enough to get it done and dominate that fight from 3 to 5. You know what I mean? So
I didn't actually think of this question until Tuesday. I went to jiu-jitsu class, and my instructor was telling me, he's like, "Oh, did you see that heavyweight fight? It was super boring." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, Chael Sonnen and Rampage Jackson." And they're like, "Wait, those guys are fighting?" And I'm like, "Wait, are you talking about the Stipe Miocic, Francis Ngannou?" And he's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "That was boring." So I think, people are very mixed on that. I was working as I'm watching the fight, so, I'm a little distracted. If I had to really sit down and just watch the fight, as an entirety with no interruptions, I can see why, the first half is exciting. But after that, I mean, I think there was a statistic out there that, like, at one point in some round, there was like 5 punches thrown or something like that. It was ridiculous.
The drama of that first round was ridiculous.
That was worth the $65 alone. We all thought that it was only going to last 5 minutes, right? Most people thought, so the rest is kind of gravy. Those first 5 minutes, to me, were absolutely terrifying, as you said. Like, I was nervous watching them because I thought someone was going to break
And from our vantage point, you could see a couple of the shots that Ngannou threw that just missed. Like, you just missed. Went right by his chin.
I felt like I could feel them. I mean, really. I mean, I'm sitting there at cage side when he was throwing those. And there was one point where after a couple of those punches that missed, they moved their position so that I could look right into Stipe's eyes, and his eyes were like saucers. And you could see he was on hyper alert, just trying to make sure that he didn't get hit. And I thought, man, he's going to be cooked. But then there was a point where he just figured out that he could start launching some offense. And once he started hitting Ngannou, now Ngannou had an iron chin because Stipe hit him pretty well a few times. But once Stipe started hitting him and getting confident and realizing that if he kept his distance, he could nail the guy. He was faster and he was more disciplined. He could set up his punches. I mean, he just was he's a better fighter. I mean, bottom line.
Chuck, let me ask you, after the fight, some people were sort of reveling in the fact that, the UFC put all their chips in the Francis Ngannou, side of the table, and they really wanted him to win, and look how it, blew up in their face. But to that, I would say, the UFC actually promoted this fight the right way.
100%.
You have to build up the contender. If there is no stock put in the contender, then people are just sort of like apathetic towards it, right? Like you have to build up the monster, correct? They didn't do anything wrong.
This is what I'm preaching, because I've been basically pointing this out, and I wrote a fairly sensationalist piece for The Ringer. Was basically where the word unicorn is used and stuff like this, where Ngannou is kind of the feature as the inevitable guy coming to take over, right? So I'm guilty of it as anybody, and I just say that. But at the same time, what is the point of these? What is the point of any of this if you can't overhype? Or it's all hype, right? It's all about how you want to shape hype. You have a champion who's probably not going to sell himself. Therefore, the louder voice chorus is going to be for the guy coming to take his belt. That's just the way the fight worked. I personally thought, like, even if you go back and you look at Miocic's career at the beginning, he lost a couple fights. I think through 8 fights, he was 6-2 before he went on this last run. This was a guy who was 6-0. He had finished all of his fights. He'd gotten through a couple of guys. If you look at his resume from comparably, like it was, Curtis Blades is up in the top 10 still. The guys he was beating weren't slouches. Sure. And then to do it the way he was doing it, all the hype was deserved. If you're not hyping a guy coming up just like he is in the heavyweight division, a division where they destroy each other, you're not. The UFC is not doing its job if it's not hyping that guy. Yeah. And the media is being foolish not to acknowledge that this guy is that big of a threat. It was perfect for Miocic, who's not going to sell the fight. You want people to pay attention to Miocic, guess what? You just got it. Sure. They just saw what he was able to do with the guy coming to take his belt.
I thought that Miocic seemed to take offense to the way the fight was being hyped, and I think that's his right. I think it's perfectly fine for him to feel like he was slighted in the buildup. That doesn't mean that he's right. It means that in his reality he's right. But I mean, as Chuck says, it's you want to build up the challenger as somebody who's this unstoppable force. I mean, look at the difference between the main event and the co-main event in the lead-up.
Sure.
Here's Daniel Cormier talking about how this guy is the junior varsity, and he proved that it was the junior varsity. Yeah. And so I wasn't quite as excited going to that fight, even though the guy he was competing against had 2 knockouts in less than a minute leading in. I still thought, okay, I think Cormier's right. This guy's a junior varsity.
I would go ahead and say, like, it'd be promotional malpractice not to promote.
Ooh.
The way.
I do not think we're allowed to use that phrase. I think you are.
The way it is.
Yeah,
so, I mean, you got Francis Ngannou, knocking out tons of people. Just his physique, his story. You have to promote that fight that way. I mean, how else would you promote it? And Stipe Miocic, I understand where he's coming from, but at the same time, is like, okay, they've built up this guy as this, crazy contender, this dragon. And if Stipe went out there and slayed the dragon, I mean, more props to him.
Sure.
It adds to his record.
So the most comparable fighter you could find to what Ngannou was doing in his route to Miocic was JDS when he made his run toward Cain Velasquez.
Yep.
Right? So they put these 2 guys together. Now, this was exact situation. JDS happens to win it in 61 seconds or whatever it is. But we find out later that Cain Velasquez was messed up, his knee. Let's just say, though, Cain Velasquez did what he did in the subsequent fights. He did that the first time through. JDS would have been treated the exact same way. It's such a game. That's the weirdest part of it. It's such a game of inches. He could have been knocked out. Miocic could have been knocked out. But the fact that he wasn't makes you acknowledge him as the champion in a bigger way. Okay, in a bigger way than you did.
What do they do with Stipe Miocic? And we'll get to the scene with Dana White and the belt in a second, but he doesn't embrace doing media. He doesn't this is one guy who I think really benefits from embedded, because when you see him at home joking with his friends at Home Depot with the snowblower, it's actually sort of captivating. I actually really enjoy it. Other people are really boring on embedded. He actually, I think, really shines on embedded. That being said, he's the heavyweight champion of the world. He's the quote-unquote baddest man on the planet. He just broke the record for most title defenses. this is what you want, right? This is what you want. He's a firefighter. He's a good Samaritan. Like, yes, he doesn't wear bling bling and talk smack, but this is kind of what you want. Yet for some reason, there isn't a connection there. And maybe he's not on the same page as his promoter. And again, we'll get to that in a second. But Dave Doyle, our colleague, was saying in our post-fight wrap-up that like he kind of feels like, you know, he's sort of reached his ceiling. Do you guys feel like there's more work to be done or that can be done? Is there more room to grow for Stipe Miocic? The heavyweight champion of the world who's winning fights in impressive fashion should be a gift from the gods, right?
I
Yet
think
for some reason he's not viewed that way. Why is it?
I think that in some way he probably has reached his ceiling.
Okay.
It's one of those types of situations where when you see people who appreciate him digging their cleats into the ground saying like, hey, you guys got to appreciate this guy. You know, it's like, it's one of those things you're like, well, that's not how it works. You don't try to convince people to appreciate it. It's just you have that or you don't. Like at some point you either translate for a bigger audience or you don't. I'm not sure. I thought that this was a great performance. It solidifies him historically. It solidifies him as, in my eyes, as maybe one of the greatest, if not the greatest guy. But at the same time, I don't think he's going to be a bigger star. It depends on kind of too with, like, let's say Brock Lesnar comes, I don't know who would they throw at him next, but it depends on the magnitude of the fight, but it's still going to be the magnitude of his next opponent. You know what I'm trying to say?
Is the blame on him, though? Like, he could be upset about not being pushed, but if you're going to go out and do interviews and give 4 or 5 word answers.
It's got to be somewhat, right? It has to be. I think you have to accept that that's part of your job. I mean, that is part of what you're there for. And let's not forget, now, it's a heroic job he does. He's a fireman, but the UFC traditionally frowns on people who have day jobs. They don't want a champion to feel like it's a hobby.
Right.
You know, that there's a guy with a hobby. Hey, he's our champion as well. You know, they don't want that perception. There's a disconnect there too, and probably that disrespect that comes from that Miocic perceives is in some of that wiring. You know what I mean? Like there's some weird things going on behind the scenes that
the behind the scenes stuff is very like inside baseball in our sport, and he doesn't want to talk about it, right? He's talked about it a little bit here and there. He's been on my show and talked about it. I've tried to bring it up, but there's only so much you could say without him saying it. And then on Saturday, he's about to be, you know, sort of celebrated, and it's this great moment. Dana White's going to put the belt around his waist, and he takes the belt from Dana. He doesn't take it in an aggressive way, but he's just like, yes, thank you very much for this. Here's my coach, Marcus Marinelli. I'm going to give it to him to put around my waist. And then he has some lines, right, where he says, you know, this man respects me, and I respect him. So there's like a bit of passive aggressiveness. Yes, subtweeting, if you will. What did you make of this scene, Danny? What did you make of the whole thing, how it played out, and the attention that it received afterwards?
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting because you know, when the UFC has sort of like rifts with certain fighters, there's certain little things that you can look out for that happen. I remember when Stipe was getting his hand raised and, you know, they were announcing he was, you know, and still, he turned around and he was looking around like, okay, where's my belt? Because he was supposed to, I guess, feel some, you know, the strap going around his waist. And he turns around and, you know, Dana's like behind people, and then Dana all of a sudden starts going through people very slowly, and Stipe's like, wait, give me that, and then gave it to his coach. It kind of reminded me of the Conor McGregor when he won the 2 titles, and he's like, wait, where's my second belt? Right. And, you know, they didn't have that prepared. So, you know, you do kind of see those things, and you're like, there's definitely something there. And Stipe has, you know, maybe not spoken a lot about it, but he's definitely acknowledged it by saying, you know, certain things. So yeah, I thought it was very interesting and very telling of the.
Should he talk about it more? Like, is this a way to maybe, like, everyone appreciates a good employee versus employer, or perhaps in this case, I should say, independent contractor versus, you know, employer feud. But is this something that he should actually build up?
No, he should be Stipe. I mean, I think that it was the perfect Stipe moment. I mean, you cited McGregor, and there's Conor, you know, getting ready to climb up climbing up on the cage with one belt and very publicly saying, "Where's my other belt?" That's
he called him cheap too.
That's a McGregor moment. That's because he's a guy who is more boisterous, more out there. Stipe, very subtly, and like you said, it wasn't aggressively. He just sort of leaned over, took the belt, and gave it to his. That is what makes Stipe, and I think that is where the appreciation is. I mean, I kind of agree that maybe his ceiling is being reached in terms of being a huge star, but maybe not, because, you know, it depends on his next couple opponents. I mean, obviously, there's a chance that they would feed him Cain Velasquez, but I would like to see Velasquez get back in there and just thrash somebody, and then that's the next guy who, you know, that would be the next real threat. I mean, I think that Stipe is kind of contingent upon facing people who are considered big threats. Ngannou was considered not just a threat, but it was almost a fait accompli that he was going to go out and win it. And what happened? Stipe shut him down completely and beat him. He didn't just take him down and lay on him. He took him down and beat him up on the canvas. I mean, that was why the people were not booing. This is very telling. You do not see a fight where there's that much time on the canvas where fans are not booing, and they were not booing. They were cheering him. They were watching him beat down this guy who was indestructible, and they loved it.
UFC needs to figure this out, though, in my opinion, because the heavyweight champion should be one of the faces of your organization. Like, you need to parade that guy around. Again, baddest man on the planet, all that stuff. People just relate to the heavyweight champion, and guess what? In boxing, which, historically the heavyweight championship is the glamour title, there aren't that many white American champions. Here you have a white American champion. And what's the line in boxing, right? The Great White Hope. They always look for them. They don't come. This guy is legit. He's not some product of a promoter's dream. So you actually have to build him up and try to get him in front of the right people. And this constant struggle between the UFC brass, like at the end of the day, the structure of the UFC isn't like boxing, right? Because if I'm signed to Don King is going to go out, if I'm a boxer, and tell the world how great I am. Well, the UFC has so many fighters, they can't just side with one guy. But then what we get more often than not are these mini squabbles where nothing is being done. There is no promotion being done whatsoever. And they have to try to figure it out. They have to make him happy. His one misconception, and I'll get you in a second, one misconception that people had is that he was upset about the promotion of the fight. And maybe that was the cherry on top, but he was really upset about his pay. He said this time and again, he was upset that Overeem got paid more than him in Cleveland. He was upset that JDS got paid more than him in Dallas, and they haven't rectified the situation. They need to make him happy, because if you have a sort of surly, uncooperative champion who doesn't want to do media, who doesn't want to go to bat for the company, who doesn't want to actually go out there and promote his fights, it doesn't help anyone. The heavyweight championship is something that you need to capitalize on. So I feel like they need to figure this out now.
I think that the key word there is now, because there was Stipe Miocic's promotion pre-Ngannou fight, and then what we see now. Because I think a week ago today, if you asked the UFC brass who their heavyweight champion was going to be on Sunday morning, I think that almost everybody there was going to say, well, it's going to be Ngannou. We got this guy.
Who they want it to be, or who they think it's going
both.
to be?
I think both. I mean, I think that he was the favorite, first of all, and I think they expected that was going to be the case. So they were not promoting the champ because they didn't expect him to be there anymore. Now he's there. And who do you see in the heavyweight division who's going to unseat him? I mean, I don't see anybody out there who I would favor over Stipe Miocic right now. And so if I'm the UFC, I'm like, okay, this is the guy that's going to be there for a while. We better get behind him.
Perfect segue. Thank you for that, Jeff.
Okay.
Right afterwards, Dana White is saying, I want to see this Daniel Cormier fight against Stipe Miocic. Do you want to see it, Chuck?
I mean, you hear it aired and you think, okay, that would be compelling. They just both fought, so they're both right on your mind. You think, well, Cormier, who's he going to fight next? It's like one of those things, they're both in a similar position. But at the same time, man, yeah, it's crazy, because I get why Cormier doesn't want to jump back up. It's like I can't help but kind of empathize with him and why he wouldn't want to do it. Not just from the Cain Velasquez, but just because, he's worked so hard to get his body to a position where he can make the weight. And I know it still hurts him a lot to make that weight, but I mean, he's in that position. But to go back up, I almost feel like he'd be saying goodbye to 205 for good. You know what I mean? So if he's going to do something like that, I'd rather be a sayonara fight or something like that, but not really. I mean, I kind of want to see... it makes sense on some weird level, but at the same time, I'd rather see them fight guys in their own division. You know what I mean? Regardless if there's a guy that's obvious for either one of them right now, I'd still rather they kind of go that direction.
I think, there's nothing going on at, light heavyweight and nothing really going on at heavyweight. I think that fight makes sense at this point. But obviously, I understand DC not wanting to go up because of Cain. So I think that's the biggest question. When is Cain going to return? Because in my opinion, the two best heavyweights in UFC history it's between Cain Velasquez.
All scenarios are linked through Cain, really.
Yeah. Between Cain Velasquez and Stipe Miocic. So I think that's the fight to make. But it all depends on...
You would give Cain an immediate shot at Stipe? But if he comes back in the summer, let's just say if, it'll be 2 years since his last fight. 2 years.
The last fight was what, against
UFC 200. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends whether Cain wants the tune-up fight or not, but I think he's really one of the best heavyweights out there.
2 years, though.
Yeah, I mean, maybe getting a tune-up fight, and then in the meantime, give him, I don't know, somebody like Fabricio Werdum to just keep the train rolling. But, I mean, talking back to Daniel Cormier versus Stipe, I would like to see that fight happen, but again, it all depends if Kane's going to come back. If he really is going to come back this year, probably not. But if he's not, why not? You know, Cormier says he's going to retire in 2019.
Yeah.
Let him cement his legacy. I think if he gets a victory over Stipe Miocic, becomes a two-weight world champion, heavyweight world champion, he'll put all that John Jones thing behind, and he'll really establish himself as a true GOAT.
I mean, I do agree that the Velasquez fight is the fight, but I would push it off a little bit, partly because of the possibility of ring rust, but also just just as part of the way to build it up. I mean, I would actually put, you mentioned Verdum, I would, rather than giving him a title fight, I don't think he's earned his way back to a title fight, but one of it, but who do you beat?
I mean, the heavyweight division, that's not kind of the story.
But, you know, I would rather see Verdum against Velasquez, because Verdum has a win over him, and Velasquez, I mean, has got to come back, and I'd like to see that. And then if he can go out there, if he were to wreck Verdum, then and actually either guy, whichever one of those.
Is Derek Lewis still scheduled to fight in February?
Next week. Next month. Excuse me. Against Marcin Tybura.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know he lost his previous fight to Hunt, but before then he was on a run.
Yeah.
And maybe he enters that fray somewhere, because I feel like he's got that.
I'd like to see Derek Lewis if he wins, or even if he loses, fight Francis Ngannou.
That would be
I feel like they've been talking it up a lot.
And I feel like the
before.
build-up would be interesting, because Ngannou's not afraid of saying,
Sure.
we saw him in the press conference against Stipe. And we know Derek Lewis is a troll, so you know, that would be an exciting
that
build-up.
fight would not get by the first round.
Yeah, that'd be like.
I mean, that's
Every time they say that, it goes by round.
I can't imagine.
I just thought it was so telling that immediately, like minutes after the main event, here's Dana White of all people suggesting, I want to see this
He's the
fight.
one who always reminds you that he doesn't matchmake right after a fight.
But B, isn't it telling that in this new era, we're talking more about quote-unquote super fights or champion versus champion fights than we ever spoke in the 15, 16, 17 years that Zuffa was around. Right now on the table, DC Stipe, TJ versus DJ, Cyborg versus Nunes. And I am hearing that the idea is being bandied about to have all three of those fights on International Fight Weekend, the July 7th pay-per-view. So not only are you doing 3 title fights, but you're potentially holding up 6 divisions in one night. Is this a product of the UFC trying to, let's be honest, they do that, they have the visual of, you know, 3 fighters on this side, 3 fighters on this side, all with belts, standing up there. We're in that contract year. We need to get people excited. Is this, again, on July 7th, let's just say this happens, right? Yeah. This has been bandied about. Not done, but let's just say it happens. July 7th will be phenomenal, right? I mean, who wouldn't want to see those 3 fights? Those are phenomenal fights. It's fun to see. But is this another example of hot-shotting, right? I mean, like, think about the repercussions.
Short-term thinking.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
It's scary a bit because it goes against everything that they've done leading up to this point.
It's going to create around that. Like, that's all you say. Well, look at this gold, but look at all the toxic fumes.
Dana even suggested if he goes up, he could drop the title after winning.
Which like 10 minutes earlier, he had said he'd be super pissed that GSP is doing the same thing. I mean, it's like the hypocrisy that is layered on top of hypocrisy is just astounding. I mean, I know he's a big fan of our president, and we're talking about a guy who says one thing. No, I'm not even, whether you like the guy or not, you can't deny that he just like says stuff because he wants to say stuff.
Yeah, I just found that to be super telling.
I think the only, like, if we kind of try to look at it on the bright side, I mean, if you look at all those divisions that we mentioned, flyweight, there's not really much going on. Bantamweight, there is some stuff going on, so I guess there could be some issues there.
Much.
But still, who knows when Dominic Cruz is going to come back, Jimmy Rivera.
Oh, I was thinking women's bantamweight. Yes, fair. Men's bantamweight. Yeah.
So that could create some problems there. Women's bantamweight, not much.
Not much.
Women's featherweight, is there even a division there?
It's not even not much. Yeah. There's nothing going on.
Right. In most cases,
I mean, it's not going to be, I don't think it'll be very problematic if those fights go down, given the state of the division.
It's an archaic idea now, this whole cleaning out the division. Yeah. Although, at this point in time, a lot of those are fairly tidy divisions. Like, there's a champion, and then there's not an obvious contender or something like that. There's some kind of variation that maybe this would be the time for some of them, especially in that women's fight. Like, obviously, Cyborg needs somebody. What's the biggest fight they can make right now?
Sure.
That would be it, you know? I think from the standpoint of DJ and TJ, it's one of those situations that it's really the compelling side to me is DJ, because all of a sudden he's going up against somebody that's going to cast doubt over the situation. That becomes
But it has to be TJ going down in that case, right?
But it still would be like, I think we can all agree that Dillashaw is a really good fighter.
Sure.
You know, so him going to fight, I think that gives it something that probably DJ hasn't had since I don't know when. I mean, going back to Benavidez or something
maybe.
like that. Like, it'd have to be back then.
How about Dodson? I mean, Dodson knocked out TJ Dillashaw.
That's true.
So
like Dodson or something like. But even then, I felt like, especially the second Dodson fight, he was like, "You're right. He's got him solved." I didn't really feel that much drama. I'm trying to say, like, those fights, yes, they're very compelling, but you wonder to what extent that would kind of make a lot of things die on the vine behind it, and that's what I guess. When I said I wanted things, we talked about what we'd want in this year. I was like, maybe to simplify things again. I feel like that would be the opposite of simplifying things. It would give us a really cool fight week.
Yes.
But that's about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Chuck, you wrote a phenomenal piece on Daniel Cormier, and it's amazing, like, what a difference a year makes. I mean, in the arena, you were there. There's a "Let's Go DC" chant. In the middle of his fight. And there was a time where he's going up against John Jones with this long rap sheet, and he's the one who's getting booed, the squeaky clean, two-time Olympian. What's changed?
I think in some ways, and I was talking to you a little bit about this, is I don't know to what extent, I don't want to over-credit the Boston crowd, but they seem very perceptive of things that were going on that night. One of the things is, I feel like we've talked about this personally. DC, I feel like he grew out of UFC 214 in this weird way that we didn't expect. He comes out of a human being. For some reason, that's what I was seeing that night, like the whole way through. You're just seeing this guy, and I felt like the crowd treated him that way. Is indistinguishable between the two, the fighter and the man now, And I felt like that really was what I kind of felt like. All of a sudden, this is a real life human being you're watching. I don't know why, but maybe through that whole John Jones process, we started to not look at him that way. And I don't know, like just something gets lost in that translation. But for this particular fight, that's how it felt. I don't know if that's what the crowd felt, but they were chanting that. It was really cool. And then I thought he goes back there and he tells the story about, he told you were the one asking the question. He tells the story about, his son hugging him. I mean, you're just listening to this like, man, this is the fight game, like as good as it gets right here. A guy being able to describe these things to fan base, the media is sitting there just sort of like, wow, that's crazy, just the whole thing. I feel like for whatever reason, people are looking at Daniel Cormier differently right now than they ever have. Yeah, and I felt like that's what we just saw.
Yeah, just him walking out of the cage with his daughter in his arms. I mean, God, he just is so. He's been so humanized. And I think that's one of the things we sometimes miss with these fighters, because, these guys are just trained killers out there. And sometimes we miss that human thing. And when he lost to Jones and cried in the octagon, I remember at the moment thinking, oh, God, the people are going to make fun of him. There's going to be memes. It's going to dog him the rest of his life. And I think the opposite actually happened.
Crazy, right?
It was like, this is a human being who wanted this so much that when it didn't go his way, he just broke down. He just lost all this stuff.
We talk about people embracing being a heel or embracing being this or being like as a character. This guy never is a character. I mean, he's literally the most sincere person, and he describes it in such a way. I don't know how to explain this. I'm less articulate than him.
Your line about like he talks to you about the fight game the way you would talk to your neighbor about the rising gas prices or like
conversational.
It's amazing.
He's on a microphone. He's having a conversation. It's like he understands kind of how to fill in details that other people don't. I don't know. It's very, very weird, but he's been doing this with John Jones. He makes the whole thing very, very personal, almost vicarious. Like you hear him speak of the fight game, and I for one, have learned to really appreciate that, because he's communicating something that we will never really be a part of.
It almost feels like he's talking to you as if he were your friend. It's very, he doesn't really use any crazy words or anything. It's very, very honest. But, I think part of it, a lot of it is just because he's been so persistent, and people appreciate that. Plus, I also feel like it helped that he fought Volkan Ozdemir. Volkan Ozdemir perhaps doesn't have the biggest fan base, I would say. John Jones is a very charismatic guy. A lot of people still cheer for him. So, of course, when he steps in the cage against somebody like John Jones, you expect some boos. But against a guy like Volkan Ozdemir, Daniel being the more well-known fighter, having more history with the fans and the promotion, I think, that was...
Do you believe him, though? Do you believe him that he's going to retire by March of next year? We've heard this a lot in combat sports.
Yeah,
I'm 40 years old, I'm done. Do you believe him?
That's an interesting question, because I feel like, he's been competing since he was like 15 for forever. So I feel like, it's something that it's very embedded into who he is. He's a competitor. That's who he is. I mean, you can even see him teaching like kids wrestling. Like he really cares about them doing well and striving. So I don't know. I think it all depends how the landscape looks. Then, if there's some big fights for him that light up that fire. For some reason, John Jones doesn't get a long suspension and is lingering around. Maybe that's a fight that you know, keeps him around. But you know, part of me, I also feel like he's a bit tired. He's a bit tired of the MMA game, of everything that's been going on. He sat here not so long ago talking to you, and he was very honest about everything, and he seemed, you know, with his son, you know, asking his mom if he had won and all that, and it seems it's wearing on him, the fight game. So I don't know if he's going to stick around for much longer. It wouldn't surprise me either option.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether I would hold him to that precise date of his birthday, his 40th birthday, but certainly around that time. Yeah, I mean, first of all, he has, unlike a lot of the fighters, he has an exit plan. He has a next step. Yeah. I mean, he's fantastic at cage side. I mean, he's as good at cage side as he is inside the cage, really. And even that, there's like a kind of humanizing side of him. I mean, we were talking about, you know, how the crying thing became sort of a meme, but the other one was that great animation of when Rose Namajunas knocked out, you know, won the championship, and you see that animation of him and Anik, and I guess it's Rogan, yeah. And you know, he's like, you know, Thug Rose, and just, you know, this is not analysis as much as just him spilling out his enthusiasm, and that's something that I think all of us can appreciate, because that's the way a lot of us appreciate the fights. Like, I'm not sitting there saying, oh, wow, that was a really interesting way that she set up the right hand with that left hand. A lot of times it's just like, oh, my God, look what just happened. And that's the way he kind of approaches it.
It can be a game of hysteria. As you guys know, like, something happens on fight and everybody goes crazy. Yeah. And he's at that weird level voice no matter what. It's almost like, yeah, he lets himself go a little. He certainly has those emotions, but he's so level-headed that it just cuts right through it all the time. Yeah. Like, it's very, very different, you know what I mean? Like, in that hysteria, for him to talk about his coaches driving 5 hours, and he's just, you know what I mean? Like, it's his moment, but he's casting in as many ways as he can to the guys behind, you know, to guys who
at his core, he feels like the old wrestling coach, like even the way he dresses with his shirt tucked in and the high socks. You know, it's someone that I feel like dads can relate to. Like, we all kind of pull for that sort of guy. I want to ask you guys about this. Chuck, I'll go to you first. You know, 6 days later, I'm still trying to make sense of that press conference last Friday. I still don't understand what happened, what the message was, what the purpose was. Okay, okay, please, can you simplify this? So let me try to see if I get this straight. On April 7th, there is an undisputed lightweight title fight planned in Brooklyn.
I don't think they ever said undisputed. I think he said real.
Real, okay, real. Even better.
Obviously, it is. Obviously, it is.
I thought he did say undisputed.
Did he say undisputed? I thought he said real.
Or he might have said,
Yeah, well, okay. Well,
we know it's
more my point. The table about how much.
Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson, I guess, was the interim champion, is no longer the interim champion. That hasn't even been decided. Right. But they're fighting for a belt. However, there is still a man who claims that title. And by the way, he should claim that title because they haven't stripped him of the title. His name is Conor McGregor. What happened? What was that? Can you explain that to me?
As confused as you are, so am I.
I don't even know how to set it up.
I usually have some kind of little quip I can throw out on Twitter. I had no idea what to say about this. I'm basically like, it's impossible to actually make sense. You know, what they're trying to do is like, you can't have one that's a real champion, but at the same time you're like, we'll see what happens with the other belt. But no, we haven't stripped him, and there's no real plan to yet. Right. And there's, you know what I mean? But you're like, but this is your actual title fight. It's like that's not even, that's like, it's like when he says literally, like when Dana says something is literal when it's completely not literal. He's looking for another, you know, he's not meaning literal at all. This is one of those
Let's
situations.
cut through the message and try to decipher what they were trying to accomplish. Do you think that they were trying to hedge and almost like sneak one past us and hope that come April 8th, this fight happens, and then you should have a poster out there with a champion versus champion. It's going to be Khabib or Ferguson. Like, because that's what it seemed like to me.
Insulting if that's really what they're
That's how it came across. Let's just sneak one past them, not give a proper excuse. Next question, so that come April 8th, because what are we just talking about?
Yes.
What are they enamored with? Champion versus champion, right? This is the way. So we've moved past interim champion versus champion. We're just going to go with undisputed champion versus undisputed champion. That's what it came.
It was just
across like for me.
About the whole situation. I run the social media part, you know, with Esther Lynn over at MMA Fighting, and we had some clips on Monday because he was Tony Ferguson was on your show, and I didn't even know what to call him. I didn't even know how to introduce him. You know, tagging him. I was like, UFC interim. No, wait, UFC. I'm just going to tag Tony Ferguson says this. You know, the whole situation is extremely confusing. They're fighting for a real belt, but you know, Conor McGregor was not stripped. I think what happened is that they made that press conference and they do not have the answers yet. They do not have it figured out. So they're from here till the fight, they're trying to figure out, whether we strip Conor McGregor or not. They're trying to figure out when he's going to come out.
Why not just be honest about it? Yeah, because, I mean, honestly, they could have said, as of right now, this is still an interim fight. Like, this is still for the interim belt.
But you have a problem where both guys don't want it. Like Khabib has been very clear.
Of course, but I mean, maybe that's why. Maybe just because there's complications on that level.
And it doesn't say interim in the contract. So are you trying to sneak one past the fighters as well?
They should not have had there should not have been a press conference because this is the kind of thing. There is this thing called a press release that you send out and you put the information you want to put out, and then you just send it out, and that's it. And there's no questions asked. If you want to say, a lightweight champion, Tony Ferguson, blah 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 blah, you send that out, and of course, people.
They sent out 2 press releases. One on Thursday, they didn't call it anything, and then the next day it was lightweight, and then they're like, no.
Right, just send it out.
Even that was confusing.
But once you are standing there in front of the media, you're going to get questioned, and you were not the first person to ask. You were I think the second,
I think
right?
the third. Matt Erickson,
Matt
Nakamoto.
Oh, I thought you were after Bro. Right, that's right. Okay, so when 3 different people are asking the exact same question in a press conference, that's a problem because that becomes the story. Is the story this wonderful fight? This is a really great fight that's coming up, but that's not the story.
It's taking away from the fight in a way.
Away from it because
the story is
you're always baiting with the stakes, right? Like the stakes are really what makes a press conference.
And it does.
It's a stake.
Right. And it's not even. So the fight is not the story. Even Conor McGregor's status is not really the story. The real story is, why is Dana White sort of like trying to confuse the truth here?
Tony Ferguson said it. He's like, behind the curtain, Dana White told us one thing, and now in the press conference, he said something else. I'm pretty sure they told Khabib and Tony, look, this is for the real belt. But they're hesitant about stripping Conor McGregor, one, because they don't want to, make things worse as far as
they did it once already. They did it once,
right?
And they see, and actually he held the featherweight title for less amount of time than he now has the lightweight. So they did it once. There's somewhat of a precedent there. The thing I got from a lot of people was like, this is so simple. Why can't you understand? Why are you making such a big deal about it? It doesn't make sense. Clearly they booked this fight 4 times, and they don't want to make it for the real belt and strip Conor just in case one of them doesn't show up. Well, guess what? All you have to do is learn the lesson from UFC 221. Robert Whittaker was the interim champion, right? And they made him the official champion, then he gets injured, and now you're back to an interim title fight, which is a bit of a mess. So in this case, if you're so worried that either Tony or Khabib is not going to show up come April 7th, and you need to move on with the division, you need to put your foot down once and for all, you strip Conor, you make it for a vacant title belt, right? Like you don't crown Tony the official champion. So if Tony doesn't show up, slide in Eddie Alvarez, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, Kevin Lee, whomever you want. If Khabib doesn't show up, so you're still having a title fight. It's not contingent on one guy showing up anymore. So you learned the lesson, it seems like, from Robert Whittaker, but you're, for some reason, afraid to execute it the right way or just not knowing how to execute it the right way. And you've created this situation where right now we should be talking about, wow, it's finally happening, one of the most anticipated fights. And then you'll have people like, I love you, Josh Gross, but you can't come out and say, like, stop thinking about this, move on. No, this is what our whole being as journalists who cover this sport is to care about these things. If we stopped caring about the belts, why did we watch UFC 1? Because we wanted to see who won the tournament. And that evolved into who's the champion. The one thing the UFC always did better than boxing was make their titles feel important. And this is like the final nail in the coffin. And don't tell me that when they were trying to, do the interviews about the Ali Act, that Lawrence Epstein once said, like, oh, the championship is bestowed upon the winner of the night. That is BS. We know that's BS. The champion is the best in the division. And now you're trying to tell us that there's 2 of those. We went from the interim titles to and a real champion at the same time, just handing them out like candy, to now having 2 undisputed champions. That's a slap in the face to Khabib and Ferguson. They deserve to be fighting for a real belt, or at least know that they're not fighting for a real belt, and they don't know that.
Especially because you're making.
Amen.
No,
it's very true. But I want to say that I want to separate these things out a little bit and say, the Ferguson Nurmagomedov fight for the championship, yes, that should be for the real belt. But let's just set that aside. Let's say that if that fight were not even made yet, Conor McGregor has had enough time to defend his belt. He has not defended his belt. You need to take action independent of the other fight. You need to take action in your lightweight division, and your champion has to either defend or vacate. That's the big hashtag. Right. It has nothing to do. I mean, I know it does have something to do with the other 2 guys, but even if that fight were not to take place, you just can't have a champion who is inactive for that amount of time. And I know the UFC is complicit in this, so I don't blame McGregor. This is totally a UFC thing. It's not, McGregor is doing what he should be doing. He went for the big money, and now he's taking time off to be a dad. Good for him. But the UFC needs to have some standards, and they just don't.
I don't know what else to say. And then yesterday there's a UFC VIP experience thing, and it says interim lightweight title fight, and then they updated it and it says lightweight title fight, and Tony Ferguson on the graphics during the stare down it says champion, and oh by the way Max Holloway it says interim champion. Like, what is going on?
Maybe they go with like the boxing model and make Tony the super lightweight champion, and
that's what it
Conor
feels like.
The junior lightweight champion, and then
I don't know. Call me like a stickler, and I hear the remarks like just enjoy the fight, but these belts mean something to me. I care about these belts. Like maybe I'm a traditionalist,
or they don't. I mean, it's they either have to mean something or not mean something, and you could have either way. You know, if you want to just make fights that are great, make fights that are great. Right. But if you want to actually, have that belt and you wrap it around the guy who wins the fight, it has to mean something.
Championships mean something to everyone in every sport, right? I mean, like, what are we watching in 2 weeks? The Super Bowl to find out who's the best. You can't have two. It doesn't work that way. Like
just call that off. They're both winners.
Exactly. It just doesn't work that way. And I don't understand why they're so reluctant to just draw a line in the sand. Either say this is the interim title fight because Connor's out and we want to have an undisputed.
It's only because of the exceptional situation.
Is it really because he has more power than anyone in the sport and he can
That's the only thing I can think, because I'm like, if there's a guy who is he's literally been this guy for a couple years now. It's just, it's a whole different playing field with him. And obviously wherever he's at, however it's working behind the scenes, he's not making it easy for them to just come up with a black and white decision. Right. I mean, obviously that's what's going on. But at the same time, you're like, dude, you're the UFC. You got to move. You have to. This is the paradigm. Yeah. This is how it works. Like you just said, it has to lead something. That's where it all. If you don't pay attention to a full roster, if it's not leading somewhere, if these guys aren't being, trying to make it to the top. So it's like, this is the situation. You have the two guys, it's the perfect opportunity, and you have another guy, we don't know what his status is. We just don't know.
I would have been okay with it. I don't love it, but I would have been okay if they came out with an actual timeline. If he doesn't accept another fight, or he doesn't sign a contract to fight the winner of this fight by April 6th, then come April 7th. That's not perfect, because you want to promote this as a real title fight. Yeah. But if you would have given us something, here it came out like I have no update. So then, to your point, why are we doing this?
I know.
But the tickets didn't go on sale last Friday. You didn't have to do it. Do it some other time when you figure it out.
Funny. It's like they get stuck in an old mode, some old line of thinking or old action. Like, well, we got to have our press conference because it's usually when we do something like this.
Yeah. Well, I think
without taking the new logic into account, it's just so weird.
And I think Dana White is also used to, him being able to stand up there and say what he wants to say, and a lot of people out there not asking the questions, or if they do ask the questions, kind of like he just talks over, like, what did he do with you, with Brett? He didn't do as much with Matt Erickson because Matt was the first one to ask the question, but the two of you guys who followed up, why did you follow up? Well, you followed up because the question was not answered, and why did it take two of you to follow up? Because even the answer,
him getting frustrated means nothing to answering the question.
Right, and Dana White is used to running the show that way and not being challenged. And so here's a case. Now he has to realize, well, it's a whole new world. The fighters are challenging him. Who before Stipe Miocic did it? Who took the belt away and gave it to his coach to put it around? I think someone wrote something about how Dana White has been disrespecting the heavyweight champion. I was like, yeah, well, Stipe can get in line because, when John Jones was champion, and before he was causing trouble of his own, he was getting disrespected. Amanda Nunes, disrespected. Demetrius Johnson, disrespected.
George St. Pierre,
disrespected. That's four. I think that I counted up 7 champions. The UFC has
Woodley
UFC has 12 champions, and at one point, 7 of them have been disrespected. Now 2 of them are no longer champions. So now Dana's batting under 500, but before he was 7 for 12.
And so the lightweight picture is in focus. It's confusing. I don't care what anyone says. You can break it down a million ways and tell me, oh, this is so simple. It's not simple. It should just be, we know what they're fighting for. And then who comes through the dark clouds? Who emerges? 209's own Nate Diaz, who says that he's bored and he's coming back to save the day come May or June. Well, When you saw this, when you saw Nate Diaz reemerge, what was your reaction? Is this?
I was excited. I mean, it kind of feels like, come back already. But at the same time, he's an exciting fighter. He makes promotion feel big. He, at this point of his career, he makes fights feel big. So I'm excited for his return. Having him sitting out was definitely not fun because, again, he's an exciting fighter.
You believe that he's returning, though? I mean, it's one thing for him to say,
so,
I'm coming back.
I believe, sources told MMA Fighting that,
Yeah, but you actually believe that he's going to come back?
I hope so, and I believe so. I think, he knows he's a big draw. And Nate Diaz is a smart guy. A lot of people think, he's not maybe the brightest guy because, his persona, and, he likes to smoke a lot of weed and whatnot. He's very open about that.
That doesn't make one not smart.
No, but, that's a perception that a lot of people have.
Jeff got offended.
Although we've seen no evidence of that.
But I would say, I believe him. I think he's going to come back. Keith Thurman, I interviewed him. He's one of the best welterweight boxers today. Before he fought Sean Porter, big talk was like, "What is he ducking Sean Porter? What's going on?" And I got a chance to talk to him through Fight Hub TV, and I asked him, when are you going to make this fight happen? When is it going to go down? That's the fight to make. And he's like, "Look, why the hell would I fight Sean Porter right now when I can wait 5-6 months and fight him for $2 or $3 more million?"
Why?
Exactly. Like, why would I fight him now when I can just wait a little bit more?
But why does the money go up after 5-6 months?
Just I guess,
the demand?
No, time, makes the heart grow fonder,
Okay.
Fans want to see Nate Diaz back. Fans have been imploring for Nate Diaz to come back. They really want to see him back in the cage. So
I feel like these two old curmudgeons don't really care about this. Yeah. Look at this.
Whatever,
look at this face. This
I think there's a lot of interest for Nate Diaz.
Sure.
I don't know if it's his timing. I don't know if it's just because we were just talking about the cloudiness of the situation going on with Conor McGregor and everything, but I saw it and I thought, it just seemed like, all right, well, cool. Hopefully you do. Because it feels like so many people are just kind of throwing out vague things of what's, so we're dealing in vagueness all over the place.
Yeah.
At least he was specific enough to name a 2-month span there. So it's like, yes, that'd be cool. I guess my immediate thing was like, okay, cool, get him back in the fold maybe. I don't know what I'm guessing at lightweight. So you don't know how that will. And then there's the little bit of a conspiracy theorist in me that thinks like, okay, he's throwing that in there maybe because behind the scenes, because we've talked about the fascination with the Diaz and McGregor thing before, and how they've actually been in conjunction in fighting the man in general, and how they've bettered the sport during their fight, which could be a 30 for 30 as we mentioned. But you wonder to what extent maybe he's coming into the fold to help this situation a little bit.
So you think that the only fight he really cares about is the Conor fight?
I don't know about the only one. And you're never sure, too, to what extent the sincerity of, like, hey, I'm tired of waiting around for you bitches, all this stuff.
Yeah.
You're not sure to that, or if he's just saying, like, here's a date, or let me be the one to introduce something, and then we'll start putting things around it. We'll start to build around this, you know what I mean?
What do you think, Jeff?
I don't know if he's quite that thought out. I think he's a little bit more of a rogue character than that.
I actually think he is that quite thought out. I do.
I suspect as much.
This feels calculated, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that one of the reasons we haven't seen him compete for, gosh, how long has it been now?
It'll be 2 years in August.
Yeah.
So
because he made a ton of money in the McGregor fights, and he knows that if he comes back, I mean, he knows if he comes back, he might have to only fight one more time if he gets that McGregor fight, right?
Right.
So it would seem like that would be the one to go for. I'm not that excited if he fights somebody else because I don't think of him as like I don't look at it and say, well, he's in the mix at lightweight. He's not really in the mix at lightweight.
Well, given the situation, like this is, I guess, what's bothersome, right? Let's just say he enters into this mix. And let's say that McGregor's like, I want to fight Diaz. Let's do this trilogy now. Yeah. I feel like this is a really poorly timed.
How do you think it would be accepted if they come out and say we're going to do McGregor Diaz for the belt?
Accepted that they can't do it for the belt.
But what is McGregor? McGregor's the champ.
Well, that's the perfect out. That's where Dana White saves his butt by saying, okay. Now this Ferguson Nurmagomedov is for the real belt. Conor, no longer champion, but he gets the fight, the big money fight against his foil.
If they do it like that, that'd be fine.
Yeah,
I'd be like, that's fine.
That'd be the perfect scenario.
Yeah.
But if they're going to have him remain a champion and Diaz comes back and they kind of tailor make this fight and you just exclude those other two guys, I mean, it's just I don't know. I mean,
you're just throwing sport out the window. At that point, really,
do you think there's an appetite for Diaz McGregor 3 right now? Considering how long
I think there is. I think I know you guys do not seem too amped up about Diaz's return, but You know, I think that's because, you know, we're in the media.
I mean, I am.
Jeff said he's not in the mix.
I find it
Jeff said he's not even in the mix.
Not amongst lightweight contenders.
We have a little bit of exhaustion because, you know, this is our job. We cover this sport. But for the casuals out there, Nate Diaz is huge.
The bottom line is, once there's a fight on the line and you know it's coming up and you start to hear him and he gets back in it, it always is the same thing. We were in Orlando. Remember when he was getting ready to fight Michael Johnson? It was so cool to see him back. He had been gone a long time.
He has a superstar aura.
He brings it back. All of a sudden you're like, dude, this is a Diaz. You know, like it gets real fast. It just suddenly turns on. So yes, there will be an appetite, 100%, regardless who he's fighting. If it's Eddie Alvarez, that'll be huge. If it's Conor McGregor, obviously it's going to be huge. There might be some. It just depends on how it's. I feel like the timing right now for him to come back and for them to try to put that together would be poo-pooed.
Is he being opportunistic in the sense that he's like, okay, Khabib and Ferguson are tied up. Yeah. Well, this guy is not tied up. My guy. This is my chance. They're out.
That's the way it feels.
You know what I mean?
Because I don't think he doesn't want to get in there with Khabib. He doesn't want to get in there with Ferguson.
Well, they're tied up, right? But there are other guys he could fight, right? I know Poirier and Gaethje are booked. Eddie Alvarez isn't booked. You know, he has a history with the Anthony Pettis's of the world. Do you feel like he doesn't want anything to do with these people?
Other than Anthony Pettis, I would say not really. I mean, Anthony Pettis has been on a downward slide, and so maybe that's a guy. But I don't think that would be. You know, think about the amount of money that he wants. He wants to make. He wants to retire off. I mean, he wants to make his money for retirement, and I don't think a fight with Pettis is going to make him as comfortable. He will not be getting the top level, top grade weed. On a Pettis fight, whereas you can get the best stuff.
So if he can't get McGregor, is it a mistake? Considering how low you are on his skills right now, is it a mistake? Is it a mistake for him to fight anyone but McGregor because then he might be losing?
I'm not saying I'm not low on his skills. I'm just saying that I don't think he's.
You said he's like top 30.
Ooh. Nah, just kidding. No. I mean, I think there are two different things going on here. There is the big money fight, and then there's the whatever you want to call it in the mix to be a contender. I don't think he is one of the top contenders at lightweight. He could fight. You know, he fought before he fought McGregor. He had like a Michael Johnson fight. Yeah, I think if he fought a guy at that level, he's going to do really well. But if he's going to go up there against one of these top 5 guys, I don't see it as going his way. But Conor McGregor, even though Conor McGregor is one of those top 5 guys, you still want to get him in there because of the history they have.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see what happens there. Right now, okay, if you had to book his fight, his return fight, who do you put him against?
I would have him against former champion Conor McGregor.
And then you strip him. Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Not Kevin Lee.
If they do it that way, I feel like the public.
Maybe Nate Diaz is the out they've been looking for. Maybe he's the savior that they've been looking for. Speaking of Nate Diaz, way back when, UFC 129, he fought a young buck from British Columbia named Rory McDonald. See that transition?
Mm-hmm. That was
Rory McDonald.
My head was spinning. That was amazing.
That was a 170-pound fight. Rory McDonald is still a 170-pounder. In fact, he's the new Bellator.
That was a suplex fight, right?
That was, yes, at the formerly known as Skydome, now Rogers Center. Rory McDonald's the Bellator welterweight champion, and he defeated Douglas Lima. It was a gutsy performance. His leg was all beat up, and somehow he was able to power through. And I firmly believe that this is the first time in Bellator's history where they can make the claim that their champion in a specific division is better than the UFC's champion. Obviously, it's debatable. Obviously, Woodley's a better fighter today than he was when he fought Rory McDonald, but guess what? They fought and Rory won. And I feel like that's a big deal for Bellator. Do you share that assessment?
Yeah, I do, and I thought it was great too because it actually showed how tough Douglas Lima is in a loss.
Yes.
Which was like another win for them because if you're talking about an ideal scenario, you'd want to kind of get them both that. But and Rory McDonald is one of those. When we first started covering the sport, a lot of guys came very singular disciplines that then evolved to play martial arts. Like they wanted to do the full gamut. He was one of the few guys I remember who came up very young from Kelowna, I believe, and he was coming up and he was learned in all of the martial arts. He was the new breed of guy, right? And like haven't seen him kind of go through this, his trajectory, some of the heartbreaks. I remember obviously I think it was UFC 111 in Vancouver when Carlos Condit
115.
115 beat him at the very end, a fight that he was going to win. You see that fight with Robbie Lawler. Where it's like it's just a war. You've seen him go through these scenarios, and obviously has a win over Woodley. For him to get it, man, I don't care if it's Bellator or UFC or whatever it is. You cannot help but feel good for that guy, just given the amount, like the time he's put into the sport and the guys he's faced to get here. I was very, very happy for him, man, and especially he's such a cool guy. As you know, man, he's such a good guy. People give him a lot of hell because he's the psycho thing, but he is not. He's a quiet kid. I remember interviewing him back in Montreal when he was still there, up in Montreal, and he was just such a quiet guy. I mean, it was almost like he was so painfully shy. You had to pry stuff out of him. He's obviously kind of grown into himself more, and he's a champion, man. I feel very good for him.
And how about the fact that historically it seems like when people leave the UFC, it doesn't pan out. And we all thought, he was on a losing streak when he left the UFC. He was set up as sort of like a stepping stone for Wonder Boy. He loses that fight, doesn't look like himself, and we all wonder if, a piece of him died against Robbie Lawler. And so he goes to Bellator. There isn't much of an interest from the UFC. They pretty much say, don't let the door kick you on the way out. He annihilates Paul Daly, and then he wins their belt. If you look at all their free agent signings, that's the best one. Yeah. And you can make a case right now, I think, that Rory is the face of Bellator. He legitimizes them. He certainly legitimizes that division.
He certainly could, but the one thing that kind of gnaws at me with Rory is that, all the stuff that Chuck was talking about, that was the image of Rory when he was younger, that kind of that new breed of fighter. Yeah. I kind of feel like now the image of Rory is a guy who's just damaged. I mean, the Lawler fight is just fresh in my mind, and now this one last weekend, which was, I mean, God, I remember when my son was playing youth soccer, and you had these shin guards under his soccer socks, and it was like, this is what it looked like. I mean, it looked like he was wearing like soccer shin guards or something. It was. I mean, and that's pretty nasty. If he has to take that kind of if he takes that kind of beating down the road, it's not a good thing.
Opponents, though, man. I mean, you cannot go through that list of opponents and not. I mean, those guys, especially at that 170 division in the UFC, when he was going across Lawler and all this. Yeah. I mean, they were all taking pieces out of each other, and it was brutal to watch. Then I agree that lingers for sure. That's why it was fun in that Daly fight to see him kind of return to form and to think like, okay, maybe he's got a better beat on it. And let's face it, when he fought Wonder Boy, his nose was still damaged.
Yeah.
Like I felt like he probably wasn't mentally there because of that, and then he physically has his thing going on. So I always felt like that one was a little bit of an asterisk fight.
I agree with you guys in the sense, when he left the UFC, he had lost to Wonder Boy, and it looked like, wait, is this sort of the end of Rory McDonald? But I think he's starting to clean that image up. I mean, he did take a long break before he fought Paul Daly. He wanted to let his nose fixed. He came back. He looked very dominant. It was a very smart performance bringing Daly to the ground. And he takes on Lima, but Lima's a killer, so you're going to have to take damage if you're fighting that guy, period. And, he wins that fight, and now he finally has a belt. And you see he changed his profile picture on Twitter because he had like some weird Photoshop. Now he has a picture with the belt. Yeah. He's very proud of it.
Napoleon Dynamite. It used to be Napoleon Dynamite.
Napoleon Dynamite. I think with his face Photoshop. Yeah. So it's really nice seeing him with a belt because this was a guy that was pitched as the new George St. Pierre, the next thing in MMA. And, he had some rough patches, but I think he's back and he definitely legitimizes Bellator and their welterweight division.
Yeah, and gives them a reason to go to Canada. I feel like they can sell out a show in Canada.
You said that when he came aboard, you're like, well, now they have the representative for Canada. He's supposed to be the next GSP up there.
Sure. And one of the best things having a fighter in your promotion, we talk about Stipe and his relationship with Dana White and him being discontent, is having a fighter that's content and that likes being in that promotion. And Rory looks like he's enjoying Bellator and the relationship is great there. So I think it's a perfect match. Yeah.
Okay, and then they also had the first fight of the first round of the Bellator Heavyweight Grand Prix featuring a former middleweight and a former light heavyweight fighting at heavyweight. Chael Sonnen defeats Rampage Jackson. Yeah, they brought them all out. They paraded. They made it feel like a big deal. I still don't know if I'm sold on it, just because half of the field aren't heavyweights. It doesn't feel like the Strikeforce Heavyweight Grand Prix. How did it come across to you guys? Did you feel like this was all right? They are basing their whole year on this, right? I mean, it's a big deal. They're going to crown their heavyweight champion. But what if Chael Sonnen wins the heavyweight championship? Like, is he just going to defend it against
he said he would.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't buy it. Do you guys feel like this is an important thing? Does it feel big to you?
It's so weird still because you look at the brackets. It's kind of fun in this weird way because I wanted to do a piece where you're just kind of like doing a bracketology, who's going to win, who's coming out of the way,
tournaments
that sort of
fun.
But at the same time, man, obviously it's a lot of guys, former legacies, a lot of guys on fumes, a lot of guys are just like, hey, why not at the end do this, sort of thing. Right. So it's almost you have to accept it. If you want to enjoy it, you got to accept it on a whole different level of saying, like, I just want to watch this for fun. It's not really, like, forget about the them crowning a champion at the end or whatever. I'm like, you maybe watch this for its novelty and it's fun, you know, because even Frank Mir coming back and these things, I'm like, what's Frank Mir going to look like? They did that square off and he looked like...
He looked huge.
He looked huge. I'm like, this is it's so bizarre, but it
has been 2 years
it's
since
fun,
he
though.
fought. But...
I find it fun. I think a lot of the fights may look kind of like the one we just watched, where they're not going to be the most exciting things to behold, but it'll be fun to watch the attrition. You know, them going through each other.
I thought Sonnen looked good though, compared to what he's looked like in Bellator
we were
before.
singing him out after the Tito.
I mean, I thought he looked good, and you know, part of that might have been that he was fighting Quentin Jackson, who really just didn't look like there was much there. I mean, I hesitate to use the nickname Rampage anymore, and I feel like for years it's been more like a mild disturbance as opposed to a rampage. There's really not. There is. I mean, even when he is at he musters, you know, one or two punches, and he just doesn't. He seemed like he fought the way Ngannou fought rounds 2 through 5 was the way. You know, Jackson stepped out of his own corner from the beginning. I mean, he just didn't have very much energy out there, and so
you read
I guess
Jeff was killed by a chain.
So I guess you have to grade Chael on a curve, I suppose. Yeah. But I thought he fought smart. He didn't. You know, I know he got criticized afterward by Jackson for, you know, fight like a bitch. He outstruck him. He didn't just go in and take him down immediately. He outstruck him on the feet, and then when he took him down, he said. Someone said, "Oh, how many takedowns you're going to get?" He said, "I'm going to take him down. I'm going to get 3 because when I get him down, he's not going to get up."
If Chael's going to exactly what happened, he's going to have to do exactly what he was doing there. I mean, if he's going to compete in this tournament, if he has any business in it, he's going to have to do it the way he just did it.
But he's not going to. If he takes down like if Mir.
Well, I believe the biggest fight that they could possibly put on in the whole tournament is Chael versus Fedor, because everyone who fights Fedor is so respectful.
That's round 2, brother.
Fedor has to get by Frank Mir.
I know.
But I mean, he's been talking. Remember, I did that sit down with him like almost 7 years ago, I think it was, where he was talking about like how Fedor fought in fixed fights and Pride. I mean, like he has. Remember MSG? They had the press conference and he's making fun of him. He's sitting right next to him.
It's so awkward, isn't it?
But no one does that to Fedor.
Well, nobody did that to Anderson Silva, and look what that turned into.
Yeah. There you go.
Like he was the first one to go poke the bear, man. It was like
that's the biggest fight I think.
But at least that would be. I mean, I know when he came on your show the other night, Chael was talking about how the size difference between him and Jackson, and that was noticeable. But imagine if he has to go against Frank Mir. I mean, that would be ridiculous. I mean, at least Fedor is a reasonable sized heavyweight, and it would be a little bit more. You know, it'd be easier to watch in that respect.
I guess we've established our rooting interest. We want Fedor to beat Mir because we want to see that fight.
Well,
I don't even know.
You said it, Chuck.
I'm not even sure, but I think that it's. But I would say ultimately it was a successful night. I mean, as much as I was down on the Quentin Jackson performance, I thought that it was partly because Chael just wouldn't let him get off his punches. I thought Chael just did a really good job.
I think the excitement right now for the tournament might be a little low just because, you know, we saw a fight that is not really a heavyweight fight, but I think once we start rolling out the Fedors, Frank Mirs, and the heavyweights, Roy Nelson's in there too, you know, and things start...
Tough 10 cast.
Yeah,
that's true.
Rematch.
And things start, you know, getting a little further down the tournament. I think we're you know, there's going to be some excitement.
We're about to head over exclusively on Twitter for the MMA After Hour, but quickly before we go, there's a Big Fox show. And how the Big Fox shows have fallen on Saturday. Yeah. It feels like a Fight Pass show, right? I mean, like you look, with all due respect, the lineup, it's one of the worst Fox shows until next month's Fox show in Orlando.
That one is.
That's
a head scratch.
Is there something more to this in your opinion?
Know,
is this part of the negotiation? Like, hey, you guys want to play hardball with us? We're about to give you.
I didn't anticipate this sharp turn to. I mean, because we talked about a lot about like kinds of fights they like, which would be like two contenders who obviously maybe they're you know. If we're being real, one of the hotter female fighters would be like fighting or showcased in these situations. This is one of those. This is weird. Both of them. I looked at both of them. I'm like, this is just. It's a little different. This is a little different. So I don't know. I don't really know. I can't read into it, but
I feel like this is not a coincidence. I feel like this is like, hey, you guys.
They're not. I mean, they're not.
I mean, I feel like you have a point, and I
wouldn't even
feel
be like FS1. Like it wouldn't even be one of those type of shows.
Yeah.
I feel like that's definitely playing, but I also, you know, what does the UFC have to work with right now? If you look at the middleweight division, all the guys are booked, you know.
I mean, the main event is fine. The main event to me is fine.
Yeah, I mean,
and it's a good main event for that market. because Brunson is from North Carolina.
Yeah.
But the rest is not fought. Like when we started off with Kane versus JDS, and then the next, like we were always told that Fox cards are #1 contender fights or sometimes title fights.
Yeah.
Jeremy Stevens versus Josh Emmett isn't that, and it's just, it's amazing to
They've
see
had so
what's
many
happening.
cards that it's hard to fill up, all those Fox cards with, real good fights when you're barely even filling up your pay-per-views with good fights. So,
Yeah.
You still think that
there's
those
just too many
particular
fights going
would
on.
be the next best thing to a pay-per-view, not worse than an FS1.
Right, yeah.
That's what's weird about it.
Like the St. Louis card was better than this.
Yeah. Oh, by far.
Yeah.
By far. There was it was double, double
The depth, yeah. Somewhat surprising. Somewhat surprising.
I saw Luke was talking about there's no buzz for this card. There's actually less than buzz. It is weird coming out of this pay-per-view that there's a Fox card coming up, and literally, who would know that?
You're going to be there, right?
Yeah, I'll probably be out there.
So that's the buzz right there.
Yes.
Are you going? No.
As a fan.
Is that true?
Yeah.
To the Charlotte card?
Yeah.
Get out of here.
Yes.
Really?
But
Why?
it's because I have a buddy out there. This
Oh,
seems
okay.
like this is not really.
Okay, well, you just
Look for him in the
That is-
stands, ladies and gentlemen.
I'll be
look
in
at
the
Jeff giving up
Look
his
at
secrets.
yeah.
Off the
I was
record,
going to try to
Jeff.
get out there
Off
without
the
like
record.
a lot of fanfare, but
All right, well, now there's going to be tons of fans asking for photos, selfies,
Stick your head
autographs, and more.
I'm not doing incognito ticket.
Yeah, exactly. All right, guys, this is what we're doing now. We're going exclusively on Twitter, live.twitter.com/MMA fighting. That's the address over there. It's our usual home. You've been sending us some questions all show long, and I'm told we have some good ones coming up. So if you're watching us on YouTube, if you're watching us on Facebook, on MMAfighting.com, go to Twitter. This is only on Twitter. It's called After the MMA Beat. We'll answer some of your questions for the next 25 minutes or so. It's going to be a lot of fun. We usually like to get a little wild and wacky when we do this, especially Jeff. Sometimes he even takes off his shirt. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
Hanks of unbraided hair.
No way.
After the MMA Beat starts right now.